A royal guard stands perfectly still at Buckingham Palace, watching hundreds of tourists snap photos when something catches his trained eye that makes his blood run cold. A little girl near the gates isn't behaving like the other children. She's pacing, anxiously scanning faces and checking over her shoulder every few minutes. When a white van honks once from across the street, the child's entire posture changes, and she begins walking toward it with robotic determination. What the guard discovers inside that van will haunt you, but his split-second decision saved a life. If you are hooked by this story, give the video a like, subscribe for more powerful tales like this one, and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Staff Sergeant Declan Row had mastered the art of seeing without appearing to look. His 18 years of service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and a Queen's Gallantry Medal had honed his vigilance into something approaching perfect awareness. While tourists fumbled with cameras and parents chased wayward toddlers, Row's eyes swept the crowd in systematic patterns that military training had burned into his muscle memory. Each face received a split-second assessment. Each movement got catalogued and filed away for future reference. The crowd pressed against the palace gates with typical tourist enthusiasm. Children squealed with delight as they posed for photos while their parents struggled to capture the perfect shot of the famous red-uniformed guards. Most people saw chaos in this scene, but Row saw order. He understood the natural flow of crowds, the way families moved together, and how genuine excitement manifested in body language. After 2 tours in Afghanistan, where reading crowds meant the difference between life and death, Row could spot anomalies that would escape civilian notice entirely. In Helmand Province, his keen eye had already foiled multiple ambush attempts by noticing unnatural behavior skills he now used on London's streets. A merchant who lingered too long near military vehicles. A child who appeared in the same location multiple times without purpose. A woman whose nervous energy didn't match her casual conversation. These observations had saved lives, and now Row applied the same vigilance to protecting civilians at home. The little girl caught his attention, not because she stood out, but because she tried so hard to blend in. Most children near the palace gates either pressed close to their parents or ran freely within sight of family members. This child, around 8 years old, with blonde hair tied in pigtails, moved with purpose that seemed wrong for her age. She paced back and forth along a 20-foot section of the barrier, following the same route repeatedly while her eyes scanned faces in the crowd. Row watched her complete the circuit 4 times before he realized what disturbed him about her movement. Children exploring new places move erratically, drawn by whatever catches their interest in the moment. This girl followed a deliberate pattern, as if she was searching for someone specific or waiting for a particular signal. Her scanning wasn't the wide-eyed wonder of a child seeing Buckingham Palace for the first time. Instead, she examined each adult face with systematic precision that suggested she'd been given instructions. The shoulder checking sealed Row's assessment that something was seriously wrong. Every 90 seconds, the girl would pause in her pacing and look back over her right shoulder toward the street behind the crowd. The timing was too regular to be coincidental, and the direction too specific to be casual curiosity. Row had seen this behavior before in adults who were expecting contact from handlers or watching for surveillance. Finding it in a child sent alarm bells ringing through his military-trained mind. Her anxiety became more apparent as Row continued his observation. The girl's hands fidgeted constantly, picking at her pink sweater and adjusting her backpack straps. She kept glancing toward nearby adults as if hoping someone would approach her, but also seeming nervous about the possibility. When other children ran past her playing games, she didn't join in or even acknowledge them. She intentionally avoided looking at guards, a final sign that something was amiss. Row had seen enough missing children cases during his service to recognize the signs of a child who'd been separated from her family against her will. The behavioral pattern suggested she was either being controlled by someone nearby or had been conditioned to follow specific instructions while waiting for pickup. Either scenario demanded immediate intervention from someone trained to recognize these subtle warning signs. As Row processed these observations, his trained gaze swept beyond the girl toward the street behind the crowd. What he spotted there would transform his suspicions into urgent action. A white panel van sat parked directly across from the palace gates in a zone clearly marked for authorized vehicles only. The positioning wasn't accidental. The driver had chosen a spot that provided unobstructed sight lines to the exact area where children gathered while remaining far enough from the main security perimeter to avoid immediate attention from palace guards. The van had been there for 30 minutes according to Row's mental clock. Most vehicles in that area either moved through quickly or parked briefly while passengers took photos. This driver showed no interest in the palace itself. Instead, he sat behind the wheel with mechanical stillness that reminded Row of snipers waiting for their targets. The man's head turned occasionally but always returned to watching the crowd near the gates with calculated patience that had nothing to do with tourist curiosity. Human trafficking reports frequently cite white panel vans because their high sides conceal interiors and discourage casual glances from passers-by. Row had seen intelligence reports about operations that relied on these unremarkable vehicles precisely because they raised no suspicions when parked in public areas. The spacious interior offered room for restraining victims, while the high sides prevented anyone from seeing inside, even if they walked directly past the windows. The van's running engine and illegal parking in a restricted zone signaled readiness for a quick getaway, details Row had learned to spot during security duty. The engine remained running despite the driver appearing to wait for something specific. Row noticed the slight vibration of the vehicle and the occasional puff of exhaust that indicated the motor had never been turned off. Normal parking behavior involved shutting down the engine, especially during extended stops, but this driver maintained readiness for immediate departure. Row studied the driver's behavior through his peripheral vision while maintaining his ceremonial stance. The man appeared to be in his 40s with graying hair and unremarkable clothing that would help him disappear into any crowd. His movements followed a pattern of watching the girl for several minutes, then checking mirrors and scanning nearby streets before returning his attention to the child. The systematic observation suggested he was monitoring both his target and potential threats to his operation. What happened next confirmed Row's worst fears about the van's true purpose. The driver reached toward his dashboard and pressed the horn, once producing a single deliberate honk that cut through the ambient noise of tourist chatter and traffic. The sound wasn't loud enough to startle nearby pedestrians, but it carried clearly to the area where the girl had been pacing for the past hour. The child's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Her nervous energy vanished, replaced by robotic compliance that suggested she'd been conditioned to respond to that specific signal. She stopped scanning faces in the crowd and began walking directly toward the street with mechanical determination that had nothing to do with a child's natural movement patterns. Her earlier anxiety transformed into focused purpose, as if a switch had been flipped in her mind. Row watched the girl's posture straighten and her pace become steady as she moved away from the relative safety of the crowded tourist area toward the isolated van. She no longer looked around or checked over her shoulder, instead walking with the single-minded focus of someone following precise instructions. The transformation from anxious child to compliant victim happened so quickly that most observers would have missed the significance of the change. The combination of evidence painted a clear picture that made Row's blood pressure spike. A vehicle parked illegally in a restricted zone with running engine, and a driver who'd been conducting surveillance for 30 minutes. A child displaying signs of conditioning who responded immediately to an auditory signal by walking toward potential danger. The coordinated timing and behavioral patterns matched everything Row had learned about predatory operations during his years protecting civilians in hostile environments. The van's occupant had chosen his position, carefully maintained readiness for escape, and successfully triggered his target's programmed response. Row realized he was witnessing the execution of a carefully planned abduction that would succeed unless someone with the training to recognize these warning signs intervened immediately. The girl continued her determined march toward the van, each step taking her further from safety and closer to whatever waited inside that vehicle. Row felt his world narrow to a single point of focus as his heart rate spiked to levels he recognized from combat situations in Afghanistan. His breathing shifted to the controlled pattern that had kept him alive during firefights, and his peripheral vision sharpened to capture every detail of the developing crisis. The psychological conditioning that had been drilled into him during years of military service was now screaming at him to act, but his ceremonial position demanded absolute stillness regardless of what unfolded around him. The Queen's Guard training had prepared Row for exactly this type of internal conflict. Instructors had spent months teaching him to remain motionless while chaos erupted nearby. During training exercises, actors had simulated emergencies, medical crises, and even terrorist attacks, while guards were required to maintain their posts without flinching. The lesson was always the same. Trust the system, radio for backup. Let specialized units handle active situations while ceremonial guards protected their assigned areas. Row's orders forbade movement, but with the girl seconds from the van, his duty to protect overrode discipline. Breaking formation without direct orders violated everything the prestigious unit represented, and abandoning his post risked serious military sanctions. The red uniform he wore represented centuries of tradition and discipline. Soldiers had died to earn the right to stand where he stood, and walking away from that responsibility carried weight that extended far beyond personal consequences. The girl's mechanical movement toward the van eliminated Row's luxury of following proper protocol. Military procedure required him to radio the command center and request immediate assistance from mobile security units stationed around the palace perimeter. Under normal circumstances, backup would arrive within 90 seconds to handle any developing situation, but the child's steady pace toward the waiting vehicle meant she would reach the van in less than 30 seconds. No amount of radio traffic would bring help quickly enough to prevent whatever the driver had planned for his young victim. Row watched the girl cross the first lane of traffic with robotic precision that confirmed his assessment of her conditioning. Her movements showed none of the natural hesitation a child would display when approaching a stranger's vehicle. Instead, she walked with programmed determination that suggested extensive psychological manipulation. The driver had positioned his van to minimize the distance between the pickup point and the child's location. Every aspect of the operation showed careful planning designed to complete the abduction before security forces could respond. His military oath to protect civilians created a direct conflict with his ceremonial duties that Row had never faced during his previous assignments. In Afghanistan, the rules of engagement were clear. Threats to civilian populations justified immediate action regardless of other considerations. But standing guard at Buckingham Palace operated under different parameters, where maintaining discipline and following chain of command took precedence over individual judgment calls. Row realized that choosing civilian safety over military protocol would define not just his career, but his character as a human being. The girl reached the curb, separating her from the van as Row weighed his options. His 18 years of service had taught him that some situations demanded action that transcended written regulations. The military had trained him to recognize threats to innocent people and respond with appropriate force. Every instinct developed through combat experience and civilian protection missions told him that following proper channels would result in a child's disappearance and probable death. Would palace protocol allow him to move, or would silence cost a life? He chose action. Row stepped forward and crossed the barrier that separated him from the crowd, knowing that his movement would be captured by dozens of tourist cameras and recorded by palace security systems. His decision to abandon his ceremonial post and approach the endangered child represented a choice between following orders and following conscience. Row chose conscience because his oath to protect civilians superseded his duty to remain motionless in a red uniform. His approach toward the girl and the van attracted immediate attention from nearby tourists, who recognized that something unusual was happening when a Queen's Guard broke formation. Row ignored the stares and raised phones as he focused entirely on reaching the child before she entered the vehicle. His military training had prepared him for split-second decisions under pressure, and this moment demanded exactly that type of decisive action. The weight of tradition and the importance of civilian protection collided in Row's mind as he closed the distance between himself and the developing crime. As he approached the van, the driver's eyes met his through the windshield, and Row prepared himself for whatever explanation this predator would attempt to provide. The man behind the wheel transformed his expression from predatory focus to concerned confusion in the space of a heartbeat. His face arranged itself into what he clearly believed was a mask of innocent worry as Row approached the van with military precision. The driver rolled down his window and leaned forward slightly, adopting the posture of someone eager to help resolve what appeared to be a simple misunderstanding. "Thank goodness you're here, officer," the man said with rehearsed relief flooding his voice. "This is my niece Anna, and she wandered away from our family group while we were taking pictures of the palace. You know how children can be during exciting trips like this. One moment they're right beside you, and the next they've spotted something interesting and off they go without thinking about the worry they cause their relatives." His practiced explanation and unnatural gestures betrayed a script, not genuine worry. Row noticed how the man provided unnecessary details about their supposed relationship and the circumstances that had led to this moment while his hands gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity that contradicted his relaxed tone of voice. Most people telling the truth about a family situation would gesture naturally or rest their hands casually. This man held the wheel like he was preparing for immediate flight. "She gets distracted so easily, especially in crowded places like this," the man continued without prompting. "My sister warned me that Anna has a tendency to wander off when she sees something that captures her imagination. We've been searching for her for the past 20 minutes, and I was just about to call her parents when I spotted her near the gates." Row's attention shifted to the girl who stood frozen beside the van's passenger door. Her reaction to someone claiming to be her uncle revealed everything Row needed to know about the man's deception. She stood pale and motionless, and Row noted that a truly frightened child would be crying, not frozen in trained silence. Instead of showing recognition relief or comfort at being reunited with a family member, the child displayed obvious fear and confusion. Her body language suggested she had never seen this man before in her life, and his presence terrified her rather than reassured her. "Anna, honey, tell this nice guard that everything is fine," the man said, turning toward the girl with forced warmth. "Your mom and dad are waiting back at the tour group, and they're very worried about you. We need to get you back to them right away so they know you're safe." The child's response exposed the lie completely. She stepped backward away from the van rather than moving closer to someone who claimed to be her relative. Her eyes darted between Row and the man with the desperate look of someone seeking rescue rather than reunion. No child would react with such obvious distress when encountering a family member they knew and trusted, especially after being lost and frightened in a crowded tourist area. Row's military training had drilled one crucial lesson into his consciousness: trust behavioral cues over verbal explanations when the two contradicted each other. Words could be rehearsed and refined until they sounded convincing, but genuine emotional responses were nearly impossible to fake convincingly. The man's nervous energy and the child's fearful reaction painted a clear picture that had nothing to do with family reunification. The driver's eyes kept darting toward the rearview mirrors and side streets while he spoke about his concern for his supposed niece. Row recognized this behavior from combat zones, where hostile actors would scout escape routes while maintaining conversations designed to appear normal. This man was simultaneously trying to convince Row of his innocence while planning how to flee if his deception failed to work. "Look, officer, I appreciate your concern, but we really need to get back to her parents," the man said with growing urgency creeping into his voice. "They'll be frantic with worry, and I promised them I would bring Anna back safely." The man's story collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, as his nervous behavior and the child's terror exposed the truth behind his carefully constructed lies. Row had heard enough deception to last a lifetime and decided it was time to see what this predator was really hiding. Row stepped closer to the van's driver's side window and demanded to see inside the vehicle. His military training had taught him that predators often carried tools specific to their intended crimes, and the man's nervous behavior suggested he was hiding evidence that would confirm Row's worst suspicions. The driver initially refused, claiming privacy concerns, but Row's authoritative tone and the growing attention from nearby tourists forced him to unlock the van's rear doors. What Row discovered inside made him reach for his rifle strap, ready but restrained by duty. A strip of gray duct tape sat prominently on the van's floor, positioned for immediate use, rather than stored away with other supplies. The tape showed signs of preparation, with one end folded over to create an easy grip tab that would allow quick application during a struggle. Beside the duct tape lay a small coil of zip ties in multiple sizes that confirmed the driver's intention to restrain someone much smaller than an adult. The plastic restraints were the heavy-duty type used by law enforcement, but their presence in a civilian vehicle painted a disturbing picture of their intended purpose. A worn teddy bear with matted brown fur sat against the van's side wall next to a half-empty juice box that showed signs of recent handling. The partially consumed apple-flavored drink indicated these items had been used recently, suggesting this wasn't the man's first attempt at psychological manipulation. Row understood immediately that predators used familiar childhood objects to create false comfort and trust in young victims, making children more likely to cooperate during the initial stages of an abduction. Row's attention shifted to a bottle of children's shampoo tucked behind the driver's seat, alongside other personal care items that had no legitimate reason for being in the vehicle. The presence of bathing supplies suggested the abductor planned to keep his victim for extended periods rather than simply moving them quickly to another location. This detail transformed Row's assessment from a planned kidnapping to something involving long-term captivity. A roll of heavy plastic sheeting occupied the van's rear corner, folded neatly and secured with rubber bands for easy deployment. Row's military experience had exposed him to crime scene analysis, and he understood the implications of plastic sheeting in the context of violent crimes. The material could serve multiple purposes, from concealing evidence to preventing forensic contamination, but none of those uses involved legitimate activities. Row noticed a second backpack pushed beneath a blanket in the van's far corner. The purple bag showed signs of wear and was covered in faded name tags and glitter stickers that suggested it had belonged to another child. The implications of finding a second child's belongings alongside the restraint materials and concealment supplies made Row's stomach clench with the realization that this might not be the man's first victim. The systematic organization of these items revealed a level of planning that chilled Row to his core. Each object had been carefully selected and positioned for maximum efficiency during what the driver clearly expected to be a successful abduction. The collection represented a predator's complete toolkit designed to facilitate every stage of a crime against a child, from initial luring through long-term concealment. The combination of evidence painted a picture that exceeded Row's worst fears about the situation. The van contained everything necessary to abduct, restrain, transport, and conceal a child for extended periods. The careful preparation and organization suggested this was part of a larger operation rather than an impulsive crime. Row understood that he had stumbled upon an active predator who had invested significant time and resources into planning serious crimes against children. The discovery transformed Row's suspicion into absolute certainty that immediate action was required to prevent a horrific crime. His hand tightened on his rifle as the full scope of what he had prevented became clear through the evidence scattered throughout the vehicle's interior. Row reached for his radio to call for backup when movement from inside the van caught his peripheral vision. A second figure burst from the van's passenger door with violent force, transforming Row's controlled intervention into active chaos. The accomplice appeared younger than the driver, perhaps in his 30s, with dark hair and athletic build that suggested he could outrun most pursuing officers. Tourist cameras later caught the second man bursting out. Row had no prior notice because the van's tinted windows had concealed his presence during the initial confrontation. The second man hit the pavement running without looking back at his partner or the evidence-filled vehicle they were abandoning. His sprint toward the nearest side street showed the kind of panic that comes from knowing exactly what consequences await capture. Row realized this wasn't opportunistic flight, but calculated escape by someone who understood the severity of charges he would face if apprehended. The man's desperate energy and immediate abandonment of his accomplice suggested he knew precisely what incriminating materials the van contained. Row found himself facing an impossible tactical situation. He had to shield Anna, control the driver, and radio backup all at once. Each priority demanded his full attention, but the rapidly evolving situation forced him to divide his focus among multiple critical tasks. The driver remained behind the wheel, shouting demands for his partner to return, while the child stood frozen with terror beside the open passenger door. Palace security responded to Row's radio call within seconds as multiple officers converged on the scene from different directions. Their coordinated approach showed the kind of training that transforms individual guards into an effective tactical unit capable of handling complex threats. The first arriving officer immediately secured the child, while Row maintained his position controlling the van's driver. Additional security personnel spread out to establish a perimeter that would prevent either suspect from escaping the immediate area. The driver's behavior shifted dramatically as his partner's footsteps faded into the distance. His earlier attempts at deception vanished, replaced by aggressive defiance that suggested he knew his operation had been completely compromised. He gunned the van's engine and gripped the steering wheel with both hands, as if preparing to ram through any obstacles between himself and freedom. Row positioned himself between the vehicle and the child while shouting commands for the man to shut off the engine and exit with his hands visible. Row watched the driver's mounting desperation as police sirens grew louder in the distance. The man began scanning mirrors frantically while muttering incoherent threats that revealed his growing awareness that the sophisticated operation was collapsing around him. His earlier calm deception had been replaced by the raw panic of someone who realized that years of planning were about to result in lengthy prison sentences. The coordination between Row's initial intervention and the arriving civilian police demonstrated how effective training prepared different agencies to work together during crisis situations. The Royal Guard's military background provided crucial tactical assessment, while the civilian officers brought specialized equipment and arrest authority needed to process the suspects properly. Their combined response prevented the driver from escaping, while ensuring the child's safety remained the primary concern throughout the rapidly changing situation. Additional officers arrived to join the pursuit of the fleeing accomplice, while Row and his colleagues maintained control over the crime scene. The driver's continued resistance required constant vigilance because his desperation made him unpredictable and potentially violent. Row kept his hand near his weapon while issuing clear commands that left no doubt about the consequences of further resistance or attempts to flee. Civilian police cornered the accomplice minutes later, eliminating any remaining chance of escape. His arrest completed the dismantling of what would prove to be a sophisticated criminal network. The exposure of the two-man operation validated every instinct that had prompted Row to abandon his ceremonial post and intervene in what appeared to be a developing crime. The presence of an accomplice revealed the organized nature of the threat and confirmed that his split-second decision had prevented something far worse than a simple kidnapping attempt. The sophisticated planning and coordination between the criminals demonstrated why Row's military-trained observation skills had been essential to recognizing the danger before it could fully develop. As officers processed both suspects and secured the evidence filled, then the true scope of what Row had prevented would soon emerge through police investigation. Police investigation revealed the true scope of what Row had prevented. As victim and perpetrator identities emerged from the chaos of arrests and evidence processing, the frightened child who had walked mechanically toward the van was Anna Fletcher, a 7-year-old girl who had been missing from her home in Surrey for 2 full days while her desperate family contacted every authority they could think of. Her parents had filed missing person reports with local police distributed flyers throughout their neighborhood and spent sleepless nights wondering if they would ever see their daughter alive again. Anna's disappearance had triggered an immediate response from specialized units trained in child recovery operations. Search teams had combed through parks, playgrounds, and shopping centers, while investigators examined her social media accounts and interviewed classmates for any clues about her whereabouts. The family had received no ransom demands or communication from potential kidnappers, leaving them to imagine scenarios that grew more terrifying with each passing hour. Every parent's worst nightmare was playing out in real time as the Fletchers faced the possibility that their daughter might never come home. The driver Glenn Taylor was on conditional parole for online solicitation of minors and legally barred from contacting children, yet he targeted Anna near the palace. His criminal record showed a pattern of targeting vulnerable young victims through carefully crafted deception designed to build trust before arranging face-to-face meetings. The conviction had resulted in a prison sentence followed by conditional parole that came with strict requirements designed to protect potential victims. Taylor's parole conditions specifically prohibited any contact with children under 18 years of age. He was banned from approaching schools, playgrounds, parks, and other locations where minors typically gathered. His parole officer had emphasized that violating these restrictions would result in immediate return to prison to serve the remainder of his original sentence, plus additional time for parole violations. Despite these clear warnings and legal consequences, Taylor had deliberately chosen to target Anna near Buckingham Palace, a location known for attracting families with children from around the world. Taylor's violation of parole conditions demonstrated his commitment to continuing his predatory behavior, regardless of legal consequences. His decision to risk immediate imprisonment by approaching children near the palace showed the compulsive nature of his criminal thinking. Repeat offenders like Taylor often escalate their crimes over time, moving from online solicitation to physical abduction as their confidence grows and their need for control intensifies. His presence at the palace with a van full of restraint materials and child lures represented a dangerous evolution in his criminal behavior. The investigation revealed that Anna had been held captive for 2 days while Taylor and his accomplice planned their next moves. During this time, the criminals had likely used psychological manipulation techniques to condition her responses to specific signals like the van's horn that had triggered her robotic walk toward the vehicle. The extended captivity period suggested they were planning to transport her to a secondary location where more serious crimes could be committed without risk of discovery or interruption. Taylor's accomplice, Marcus Webb, also faced serious charges related to child endangerment and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Webb's involvement transformed the case from individual predatory behavior into an organized criminal operation with multiple participants and sophisticated planning. The presence of 2 adult males working together indicated they had divided responsibilities and developed backup plans in case their primary operation failed. This level of coordination suggested they had successfully committed similar crimes in other locations before targeting Anna. Row's break from ceremony prevented a crime that crowds believed impossible here. The investigation confirmed that his split-second decision to abandon protocol and trust his military-trained instincts had saved a child's life and dismantled an active predatory operation that posed ongoing threats to other potential victims. His intervention had prevented Anna from disappearing permanently into a criminal network that showed every sign of professional organization and long-term planning. The case demonstrated how quickly predators could exploit even the most secure public spaces when they combined careful planning with psychological manipulation. Taylor's sophisticated approach to victim conditioning and his accomplices' coordinated support revealed the calculated nature of modern child abduction operations. Without Row's military-trained observation skills and willingness to act decisively, the outcome would have been tragically different for Anna Fletcher and her family. The investigation's findings revealed how military training translates into civilian protection when seconds matter most. Row chose civilian safety over ceremony and saved Anna Fletcher's life. His 18 years of service had prepared him to recognize danger that others missed and trust his instincts when protocol demanded inaction. The skills that earned him medals in Afghanistan proved equally valuable outside Buckingham Palace because he understood that protecting civilians superseded ceremonial duties. Let this moment remind us all to trust our instincts when something feels off and to speak up if we see subtle warning signs. Predators count on people ignoring the behavioral cues that trained professionals recognize immediately. If this story reshaped your view of the guard's role, leave a comment and share how you'd react in a high-stakes moment.